I take you back to October the 7th, one of the grimmest, most horrific incidents of terrorism, incidents of man's inhumanity to man that we've ever had the misfortune of reporting or witnessing. And the unconscionable contemplation of what on earth Israel could, would, and should do in response. And the details of what Hamas did on October the 7th continue to get worse, by the way. The deployment of sexual violence, forgive me, if you've got kids in the car, just give me 20 seconds to provide a little more detail. The use of rape and then murder, gang rape and then murder, some acts of almost unbelievable inhumanity. The full details are still emerging. And there was I don't know quite what the right word is to describe the inevitability of response, okay? And I think for a while we crossed our fingers and hoped that the line between response and revenge would be clear. I think that in retrospect was very naive, but I will never apologise for hoping for the best on a personal level. It may be, well, I'd rather be naive than cynical, I suppose. I'd rather be optimistic than pessimistic. But I think that the hope that the line between response or even retaliation and revenge would somehow be clear. And it isn't. There is no difference at all. Just think for a minute, whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever you do, just think for a minute of your house being rubble, your home being rubble. That's all. It's rubble. And you have to not just work out where you're going to sleep tonight, but you have to work out where you're going to sleep until somehow, miraculously, you manage to own a house again. If you stay alive, of course, which is increasingly unlikely given the hundreds that have died in the last 2 or 3 days alone. And, your house is rubble, but at least you know you'll be safe if you move from the north, where your house has been rendered rubble, to the south, which you have, of course, been told to do. And you did. And now they're bombing you there. The displacement numbers are absolutely stunning in all the worst ways. So it as I say, those moments where you stumble into the questions. We did it on Friday on the what does he mean? I mean, if you can't answer that question honestly, what does he mean when he says nothing will stop us? If you can't answer that question honestly, then you've moved into the realms of lying to yourself, because the answer to that question is obvious. It means that there is no upper limit on civilian death in the frankly spurious claim that this is going to somehow either eradicate Hamas or secure the release of the remaining hostages. So that's all that's left. They're bombing the bit they told people to go to be safe. If that had happened on day one, if they'd said, right, go south, and then the next day they'd bombed it, what would the world have done? You see how it works. We couldn't do that on day one, so we've waited a few weeks. We told them to go south, and now we're bombing the bit that we told them to go to be safe. Because the absurdity of claiming that this is how you secure the release of hostages held in the territories that are now being bombed is so clear. We have to play a long game. We have to be incremental. We have to turn the heat up on the pot with the frog in very gently. We can't turn it from 0 to 10 overnight, because then our support in the English-speaking world, because I can tell you for sure that it is largely confined now to America and the United Kingdom for reasons I don't fully understand, would begin to wobble, as indeed it is. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, responding overnight in a way that speaks of some dilution of unquestioning support for the continuing massacre of Palestinians. But imagine if they'd started bombing the south the day after they told everyone to move from the north. What would she have said then? As it is, she says this now.
International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. I
believe very passionately and very deeply in the existence of the modern state of Israel. I find it an almost unbearably emotive issue. But I can't allow that to justify what I see happening in Gaza. So you can't pick a side to coin that horrible, meaningless, reductivist phrase. Sadly, we live in a world where you're told to. You're pro-Israel, are you? Then you must be anti-BBC. It's so pathetic to see how our population has been broken down into these sort of binary tub thumpers. But you can't call this anything other than a massacre now. And you can't justify it, frankly, on any level, unless you are prepared to accept the untold killing of completely innocent people in the spurious pursuit of the guilty. And that's the bit I don't quite get. Why do you think so few people in the West currently expressing support for the tactics, the current tactics of Israel? Because this is what they do to supporters. Anybody, not just Israel, but anybody who moves incrementally. You know, you could draw parallels with all manner of movements, all manner of political movements, but you do it. You don't go from A to Z. You go from A to B and B to C and C to D. But then you make a mockery of your own supporters because people were insisting that there was no earthly way that any hostages would ever be released voluntarily by Hamas. Therefore, we can justify the current tactics, and then they release some hostages. People were insisting, and sincerely, I think, people were insisting that because of the instruction to move from the bit that was going to be bombed to the bit that wouldn't, you could make a humanitarian case. You could claim with a conscience clear that Israel was not embarking upon anything like as barbaric a program as some of its critics claimed, because they had offered safe passage. They'd offered safe passage to the north, but now they're bombing the north. So you see what I mean? You can't defend it anymore because they've done all of the things that you said them not doing proved that they were behaving in an acceptable fashion. How can you prove that they're behaving in an acceptable fashion? Well, they've instructed people to move from the bombed areas. There's no way that the hostages would ever be released. And all of these things Israel takes away from its own supporters. Taken away from me, actually. On October the 8th, I was fairly clear that Israel had the right to respond in a well, I don't want to say apocalyptic, but in an incredibly robust and effective fashion. Of course it did. I struggle also, while we're dancing around this subject, I struggle also to accept that a country with the intelligence and military capabilities of Israel has no choice but to bomb everywhere into oblivion, to bomb the Gaza Strip back to the Stone Age, if they are motivated exclusively by the pursuit of Hamas terrorists, the leaders of whom are hundreds of miles away. It just doesn't work, does it? It just doesn't work anymore. So have we reached the end game? And for the millionth time in the last few years, I derive no pleasure whatsoever from the suspicion that we're about to be proved right if we haven't been already. Because the end game was always set to be, it doesn't matter how many civilians die. Have we reached that now? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Have we reached the bit now where everybody knows that Israel has little or no concern for the civilian death toll? Because if it did, it could simply not be pursuing the policies that it's pursuing. And that's not a bone of contention necessarily, because you may well think that that's a reasonable response to the existential threat that Israel lives under, the perceived existential threat that Israel lives under. But have we reached the bit now where everyone can agree that the direction of traffic proves an absence of concern for civilian death and a level of comfort which has been articulated by Israeli politicians, remember? It hinges upon a conviction that there are no innocent people in Gaza. They are all complicit. They haven't risen up. They haven't overthrown Hamas. They haven't taken control of their own destiny, and therefore, yeah, all right, I'll say it, they all deserve to die. That seems to me to be where we are now. And I think, with respect, you're going to struggle to convince me or persuade me that I'm wrong. because I haven't offered an opinion yet. I've only really offered descriptions and then attempts at explaining the observable reality that all of us can see.